Happy Monday, listeners. I'm Brandi, your host of No Shame, No Blame, and we are back for another episode. This week, we will be discussing another major focal point of the show, and that's emotional healing. Before I get into that, I do want to apologize again for my voice. It's mid-February here in Colorado, so there's a plethora of illnesses going around, and I'm not sure if I caught a few different things from the girls or just because my immune system is weaker, but I swear it feels like I have been sick for like 2 months straight. But anyway, I'm on the other side of it, and I'm starting to get healthier every day. So again, please just bear with me. As you can see, or I guess hear, um, I'm solo once again for this episode. So I swear something eventually will work out with another guest host. But until then, I'm all you guys got, which, hey, now the relationship is reciprocal because you guys are all I got too. So I love that for us. All right, let's just jump right in. So I'm not gonna lie, like the topic of emotional healing kind of was a last minute thing if I'm being honest here. I'm currently away at my vacation home. I flew in a few days ago and plan to stay through the weekend because, it's Valentine's Day weekend. I'm actually single, but I decided that I wanted to intentionally line up my self-care days with Valentine's Day. And so, I just did all the things that I've been meaning to do or wanting to do while I was here. This Friday, actually, February 21st, is my 1 year cancerversary. So it'll be a year to the day that I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So this weekend, I've just been intentionally reflecting on this past year and other hardships that I faced throughout my life, which is how I ended up settling on the topic. So, again, let's just kind of jump in here. Emotional healing is defined as the process of acknowledging, processing, and integrating painful emotions and experiences that have been suppressed or ignored to promote the well being and resilience of oneself. In the book Emotional Healing: How to Put Yourself Back Together Again, which is written by Dr. Barry Harry. Sorry, I had to say that very slowly and intentionally because when I was researching for the episode, it was really late and like I was doing it in the middle of the night and I accidentally wrote Harry Berry instead. And when I was rereading it, I was like, there is no way that that is that guy's real name. So I had to go back to the article to double check. Can you imagine if I would have left it? Okay, sorry, back to what I was saying. So anyway, by Dr. Barry Harry. Sorry, guys. I just have to try to bring a little bit of levity sometimes to the episodes because some of the topics can get really deep. So sorry for the immaturity. Just anyway, back to the book. He defines emotional healing as a twofold process. The first is identifying your emotional responses to any triggers in your life. So, any negative experiences or traumas, as well as the beliefs or thoughts you have around the emotion, along with behavior patterns that stem from them. Second is to tap into your inner self or inner child, as we talk about on the show, to reshape those thoughts, emotions, and behaviors with the intention to heal. Now, believe me when I tell you that is easier said than done. Okay, I have been doing my own self work through like therapy and meditation and journaling for a long time, and I am barely learning how to do these things. Well, maybe not learn, okay, like, I've known these things and done these practices, but what I've come to learn is understanding how something works doesn't mean you know how to operate it, right? As an example, we all know how to drive a vehicle, but put us behind a high-end sports car, and how comfortable do you feel driving now? What about an 18-wheeler? Again, you have a license, why can't you drive a big rig? There's more than just the basics of driving involved, right? And the same goes for emotional growth and healing. You can know about each of these things that we discuss, but unless your practice involves unlocking your emotions that come with this information, it honestly is no different from rote memorization. And, you know, what makes you any different from someone else who memorizes self help facts? And I say all that because I was that mental health student, to be completely honest. I have honestly recently just been able to start really putting emotions to things that I have actually known for years. And that I think that that's just where the true work now lies, is not in the knowing of the information, but in actually allowing yourself to feel your own emotions as you put these practices into place. Now, I do wanna say that I don't know everyone's situation, right? Everyone's story is unique and different. And something that is also a really big factor into gaining this kind of emotional synchronicity, if you will, is privilege. What I mean by that is there's a theory in psychology called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can research images of it online and it'll show you the full breakdown. I have no source to provide because this is typically covered in any intro to psych course that you're ever going to take, along with something like the Pavlov dog experiment. And, personally, I just really enjoy psychology, but I also have an elephant memory. So, yeah, like the shit's just stored in my long term, I guess. I digress. But the theory suggests that the needs of humans are arranged in a hierarchy, with our most basic needs being at the base and then the personal growth stuff at the top. He states that fundamental needs must be met for each tier before we can ascend to the next one. And at the base of the hierarchy is physiological needs, right? Food, water, shelter. The second tier is safety, which is employment, health, resources, things like that. So when we talk about being stuck in survival mode, it's because one or more of those needs are not being met presently, either emotionally or physically. You lack safety and or security. And by the way, when I say security, I also mean financial, okay? Because in our society, it's going to be extremely difficult to gain access to the other category of basic needs that I mentioned, right? The food, water, and the shelter without money. So that's why I want to point out that this type of healing and growth really is a privilege because not everyone has the luxury of financial security or having all of their needs being met that they can take the time to be able to focus on self actualization and growth, right? But that does not mean that this information is still not beneficial for you to understand in your process, okay? Even if it's not your time to take the test, I can still lend you my notes, okay? So, I say all that because I hope at some point everyone does get to experience this growth because I've talked in the past about, feeling like, um, with my family, I have always had to be like the strong one. And with that, comes the burden of not showing my true emotions about certain situations. And I don't want anyone else to feel like that. I remember when my maternal grandmother was dying of pancreatic cancer in 2014. And we all gathered at the hospice facility to schedule around the clock care for her because she wanted to die in the peace of her home. And everyone's in the room, my mom, my siblings, a few of my aunts. And I just remember looking around and noticing that everyone was crying and how, I don't know, it felt really strange to me. I felt uncomfortable seeing everybody crying. And don't get me wrong, I was heartbroken. But, like looking back now, I realized again, that's just my trauma response because I couldn't be vulnerable, right? I've always had to just put on that brave face for everyone else around me because at 3, as I mentioned in our generational trauma episode, that my feelings didn't matter anyway to people, or at least that's how I thought. And that's where I was wrong. You see, this is where the first step of my emotional healing actually began. As always, I want to clarify that I'm not a professional in any sense. I'm still growing, healing, and evolving constantly, as we all are all the time. But I have had my fair share of hardships and wondered when things in my internal world were going to change. Enter stage one of emotional healing, as outlined by Ellen McGrath in the article Recovering from Trauma, written in Psychology Today back in 2016, which she calls circuit breaking. She uses an electrical panel as an example to discuss how our bodies become overloaded with too much stimulation, danger, or even trauma, and that can result in us shutting down emotionally. Some people, have described this as like that feeling numb or dead inside. Even like medications can do that to people. Interestingly enough, I had actually thought I had endured enough of my own trauma in my 33 years of life. And to be completely honest, I also felt like I was a very emotional person. But at 34, breast cancer thrust me into this emotional journey that I was really not prepared for. So I believe that I had mentioned before that while I was going through active treatment, I really felt emotionally shut down. And I didn't even realize it until I found out that I was in remission. And then it kind of felt like, I don't know, someone kickstarted my heart, like took me off autopilot. The world just felt like it was in color for the first time, I guess is the best way to describe it. Every emotion just felt new for me. And like a child who's learning about emotions, I kind of going through a similar journey. Like, emotional regulation has been really tough for me. I think I'm realizing now that this really isn't the same me that had learned to regulate the way that I had in my life pre-cancer, right? Basically, I went through a phase of, like, emotional dormancy last year, and that changed me somehow, like, wiped my slate clean or something. So, it's almost like I'm having to relearn how to handle, like, my own big emotions as if I was a kid, but this time in a healthy way that puts me first, right? That protects my energy and peace. And let me tell you something, setting boundary has actually been so nice. Like, at first, I felt like I was being a bitch. As an example, I mentioned my siblings and I had that meeting about my grandmother, and we were all throwing out suggestions on how they can be helping me when she's living in my house. And one of them said something like, "Well, maybe we can plan Sunday dinners or something." And before I could even think, I was like, "Oh, that's a hell no for me. My house is my place of peace, and I do not want to see all that much. No, thank you." And that probably sounded like super mean, but it felt great to say because in all honesty, at this point, like, I refuse to make myself uncomfortable to make anyone else around me happy, you know? No one does that for me, so now I have to do it for myself. And again, there are various ways to go about setting boundaries, but I personally never wanna intentionally hurt people's feelings, especially, like, where I am now, you know? I used to be, like, a really aggressive communicator. You know, people really knew me for being, like, brutally honest about everything. I never, like, would sugarcoat a situation. I said how I felt, whether you liked it or not, and if you didn't like it, I basically was just like, "Oh, you're sensitive and don't like to hear the truth." So, like I said, I would just be like, "Oh, you made a wrong choice? Oh, well, you gotta deal with the consequences, like, suck it up, buttercup." Honestly, that was my energy for like, a lot of my life. Now, eventually I came to understand how hurtful all this can be. And if you're someone that's kind of in that phase of your life right now, I'm gonna challenge you with this. Think about a toddler and their caregiver, okay? If there is a hot cup of coffee on the table and the caregiver says, "No, no, that's hot," the toddler has two options, to touch it or not. But we know 99% of the time the toddler's gonna touch it. And they're gonna realize rather quickly that they made the wrong choice, right? That's the learning phase. And it's usually accompanied by a period of pain. Now, obviously, in this example, the pain is gonna be intense but short-lived, and the kid is gonna learn the lesson quickly. As we get older, obviously, the choices become harder, and sometimes so do the lessons, which is why we refer to them as hard lessons, right? The pain makes them challenging to go through. So, the last thing that I would wanna do, and that anyone I would assume would wanna do, is ridicule a toddler for feeling pain, right? So why would we do that to other people around us? Like, you wanna know what the first synonym is for ridicule in the Oxford Dictionary? It's mockery. And when I understood that, I realized how disrespectful, callous, and hurtful I had been towards so many people in my life who were just in a period of learning. Honestly, that's the only path between the choice and the lesson. Is you have to go through the pain and the struggle, right? And in that phase where you're super emotional, where you feel like a failure, that's where growth happens. And then afterwards, you learn the lesson. So back to what I was saying, I used to be very aggressive in those ways of thinking, right? Like people are just sensitive and I clearly just wasn't holding space for their emotions or taking them into consideration whatsoever. Now, full disclosure, this is a tricky balance, and I'm still in the middle of learning this right now as we speak. Okay. Because through empathy, I actually became even more of a people pleaser, which is ironic, but it's because I started seeing everyone's wounds behind their actions. And my compassion for their struggles made me an unintentional doormat for all the people in my life. If someone went off on me and was like super mean and disrespectful, I was like, oh, it's not their fault. They probably just had a really bad day. And I just happened to be the one they let it out on. A friend stood me up. Oh, they probably have a good reason, like life gets crazy, etc., etc. Like what I was really doing though was making excuses for other people, right? I was justifying their behavior and justifying them treating me poorly. Like I have bad days, but I don't make other people feel crappy because of it, And I have children at home, so my time is also valuable. But again, that was like this false sense of illusion of me being healed. Like, really, I had only stopped at, like, the halfway point. like the rest stop, if you will. You see, because when a situation was playing out in the same familiar patterns, I just thought like, okay, I needed to change how I handled them. I was still in a place that I wasn't fully healed, so I was basically like dooming myself to repeat cycles. My older sister and I have had an interesting relationship, and I really hope to explore that more throughout my healing journey. But in our past, we both have struggled with communicating with each other in a way that didn't turn into big fights and disagreements, right? So once I started learning how to regulate my own emotions and stuff, if a conversation like suddenly would go left, I would try to figure out like what the problem was and would try to fix it. Instead of texting and like having information or like the tone get misconstrued, I would just make it a point to pick up the phone and call. And even if she was frustrated and saying mean things on the phone call, like, still, I wouldn't take take them personal. I would just, like, keep my focus on the original problem, because I felt like feeding into, like, the name calling and the belittling or any of that stuff in any kind of a way, our relationship was just never gonna change. So, I didn't wanna just keep arguing with her all the time. So, my hope through doing this was that eventually she and other people would notice, like, my demeanor had changed, like, around these situations. "Oh, she's not argumentative. Oh, she's not talking crap back," whatever, and that eventually they would, like, try to meet me where I was, or mirror, like, give me the respect back that I was giving them. But we know life doesn't work like that. And, you know, clearly, and I'm not joking when I say this, for years, I did this dance with everyone in my life before I eventually realized that it was a pattern. So I got curious. I wondered, like, how did I get here? Like, why do I feel like I'm constantly running in place despite all this work that I've done and all the things that I know? So I guess I just kind of eventually figured out that as much as I had wanted to outrun my traumas, like, they were still very much alive inside me, and that people pleasing behavior was born as a way to gain control in an uncontrollable situation. So when my grandmother would drink, she would obviously become argumentative. I mentioned that my family's like aggressive drunks. Everyone was fair game. So it seemed like she would kind of single one person out for the day, and it did not matter how many other people got involved. You were still going to be her main focus for whatever her reason was. Obviously, being a young child, I didn't like the feeling that came with conflict. So when she was having a rare day where she would actually be nice to someone and just want to talk, like I would prefer to be around her. And I'm not sure what the accurate term for that is called, but hopefully I'll know by our addiction episode. If you do, feel free to like drop me a line and tell me. But I always refer to this as like the bad dog, like, I don't know, ideology, I guess. It's just the way that like makes sense in my mind. But like if a dog does something wrong, as an owner, like you would probably yell at them and they're gonna cower, right? They're gonna put their tail between their legs, their head down. They know they're in trouble. But if their owner cracks a smile, the dog will immediately jump up excited at the opportunity to reconnect with the owner. This was a similar push-pull dynamic that I ended up with my addicted caregiver. Like, she was mean, and I tried to keep my head down when she was. But when she was nice, I wanted to be her favorite. So, I mean, obviously, in hindsight, I also know that, again, that was a trauma response from my abandonment with my parents, right? My point is that I learned that behavior, and I was still falling into that trap in my relationships and calling myself healed, okay? Now, I'm in a place where I think I'm learning to see those things happening around me in real time instead of repeating what I always did, because that's madness, right? Doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. So, honestly, I'm trying to find the balance between the honest, aggressive past version of me that operated from a place of anger and sadness, and the empathetic, compassion, and loving person that I genuinely am at my core. And setting boundaries from this vantage point feels amazing, even in small forms. My ex and I have a schedule where he usually picks up the kids from school. And one day, not too long ago, he had asked if I would do him a favor and pick them up. And usually, if there's an overlap with appointments or his work schedule, I do that and it's not a problem. But on this day, neither of us had any appointments and we both had a work from home day. And we had spoken earlier in the day, and I told him, like, I had been busy at work. So, even when he came up and was talking to me, I was, like, in the middle of typing an email, and I asked why he needed me to pick them up, and he's like, "Oh, I'm just tired, and I just kinda don't feel like it." And I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting. I actually feel the same way. I am also exhausted from the day and don't really feel like going anywhere." And then he proceeds to tell me about how busy his week had been, and he was tired from driving around town and things like that. And I just kind of like gently reminded him, like, yeah, I completely understand. Totally makes sense. It's valid that you would be exhausted from doing that. But like, isn't that part of your job? That's part of your position. And you knew that when you took your job. Okay. When mine doesn't require that of me, And nonetheless, though, I still do have two jobs, even if I don't get paid for this one, as far as the podcast. But, between my normal 9 to 5 and then this one, I'm stretched really thin as well. And so, I wasn't telling him any of those things to be rude. I just wanted to point out that I was feeling similarly and that this time I was going to honor and listen to my body. So I was like, "I'm sorry, I'm just not I'm gonna stay home. I'm not gonna go. I don't wanna go. This is kind of your pickup." So, he ended up going to pick him up as usual, and it wasn't a big deal. But I'm just saying it's even something as small as that is a great practice for me, right? To start realizing just what I need and saying what I need and what I deserve without feeling guilty about it. And I guess the last thing that I really have to say about healing was just be prepared for people to question your authenticity when you've been putting in the work. Like, I've had to go back and apologize to people for how I treated them like almost 10 years ago. You know, this person has continuously still been in my life throughout these 10 years since this incident initially happened. But I still went back and made that amends with them, because I judged them unfairly from when I first met them. And beyond owing them an apology, how impactful this person had become to someone else that was important in my life. And I wanted to acknowledge that. And so that's what I did. And this happened about a little bit over a year ago at this point. And I actually just recently found out that not only did this person not accept the apology, which at the time I thought they did, but they actually are still not happy with me for my behavior, which, like, hey, totally fair. It's their feelings that were hurt, and I may have caused more damage than I realized, and it's not my place to tell someone else when to forgive or how to heal, and I'm struggling with all that stuff myself, so, no, I do not wanna tell anyone else how to do it anyway. But just keep that kind of stuff in mind, especially if you're surrounded by still people, which is actually something that my sister-in-law calls them. People that are still where they were mentally and emotionally, years and years ago, still worried about partying, still not wanting to elevate their lives for whatever reason. And no judgment to them. Everyone's entitled to live a life that they want. But, people know you one way and they might not believe it's possible for you to change, or they may just refuse to see the work you're putting into yourself. And that's their choice. To quote the book Beloved by Toni Morrison, definitions are for the definers, not the defined. So let them feel how they want. Okay. Everyone will come to things in their own time when they're ready and not a second before. All you can do is stay true to yourself and work towards being the best version of who you truly want to be. So, wow, I think that pretty much wraps up the episode. As usual, please carve out some self care time in your day. You so deserve it. If you enjoyed this episode, can you please also visit the website, www.nsnbpod.com? There you can catch up on other episodes, find all of our social media pages where we would appreciate it if you could like, follow, and share and help spread the word about the show. I am also putting a call out to anyone interested in being a guest on the podcast. I have a few people already lined up for future episodes, but the point is to hear various viewpoints and experiences on a topic. So if there's something you're interested in or have learned about or maybe gone through some sort of healing or growth journey, we would love to hear about it. It can really be about anything. And even if you don't know what to discuss, but are kind of interested, shoot us an email anyway at nsnbpod@gmail.com. Personally, I like to connect off mic and get to know people's story on a more individual basis. And honestly, through that interaction, I've actually found that the topic kind of shapes itself. So, yeah, don't feel any pressure to feel like you have to come ready with, a topic that you want to discuss. We can always figure that out. So, as always, thank you for listening. We will be back in 2 weeks. Love you guys. Bye.